All right. How you doing, everybody? This is JT here with JT Invest in You, and today we have a wonderful show for you. Today we have Michael Cotton as a guest. Michael Cotton is the co-founder of Algomint and the founder of Meld Gold, and I'm super excited to speak to him. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. All right, Michael Cotton, how you doing? I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks, JT. Thanks for having me, mate. Appreciate being able to join you today.
Of course, of course. I'm sure everyone in the audience is super excited to hear what you have to say. A lot of us have loved a lot of the interviews you've given so far. So, yeah, really, really excited for this one.
Thanks, mate. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, so why don't we just jump right into it? For those of us that know you, of course, we know you as the co-founder of Algomint and the founder of Meld Gold, but I'm sure a lot of my listeners also don't know who you are or what those projects are yet since they are so new. So if you could just introduce yourself and introduce those projects, and we could begin from there.
Yeah, perfect. So, a little bit of history. I joined into the ecosystem back day one on mainnet. I actually was surveying along with my business partner AJ all the different layer one blockchain techs. We really saw that there was going to have to be a shift from Ethereum to different technology. A bit of backstory to that as well. We'd actually been working on Ethereum for quite some time, awaiting the promises of improvements. And I think the more we started to realize that it may not be coming to fruition, the more we started to look at alternative options. And as a part of that journey, we met the team at Algorand and loved the team, got along with them incredibly well, loved their vision, loved what they were building, thought they were incredibly capable, which is, really easily demonstrated in guys like Silvio and Paul Milgren. And from there, we started building the very first project on Algorand, which was Meld Gold. For those that aren't aware, Meld Gold brings precious metals on chain. Essentially, the intention there is that gold and silver and other intrinsic metals, they are some of the oldest currencies in the world. In fact, gold is the oldest currency in the world. It's also the most widely accepted currency in the world. Still today, it's the only currency that has the exact same value in local currency in every country of the world. And the intention with blockchain was to remove the barriers that allowed it to really act as a currency again, which required a few different things. Number one, the blockchain component would allow it to be transacted trustlessly digitally at velocity. And then secondly was digitizing the actual supply chain, because there's no point in just being able to trade it digitally. You also needed it to be highly efficient on the physical side. So 99% of the project's actually on the physical side, and it's been working towards the Algorand ecosystem really growing so we can start to take velocity in the digital side of the world. As a part of all these conversations, AJ and I are both from a venture background. We both invest into the crypto space as well as the traditional space. And we started Meld Ventures, which was a venture capital fund, or an venture lab, we call it, inside the Algorand ecosystem specifically, designed around incubating, building, accelerating, investing in what was needed in the Algorand system and helping with what was missing. And a big part of that was Algomint. And so for those that aren't familiar, Algomint is a bridge. It's allowing equity to flow from, at the moment, Bitcoin and Ethereum into Algorand and vice versa. And long term, though, that bridge will transition into a more decentralized, trustless bridge, and will have a lot of additional capability. But in particular, it'll be to allow the flow of equity between chains. A part of our vision of why we are such strong believers in having a bridge is we really think Algorand will end up being a home base. It'll become the bridge for TradFi into blockchain. So we really think it'll be a core starting point for so much of the world's value. And when I say value, I don't just necessarily mean financial. It could be information, it could be communication, it could be community interaction, but it'll become this hub of where most things start as a base and then they move where needed if required to go across chain.
Now, it's funny that you mentioned that Algomint wasn't necessarily the original idea. It was just something that you realized you essentially needed, that you needed a bridge, because you aren't alone. I've spoken to other builders that realized, they were trying to build another project, but they were like, wait, but Algorand needs this first. For example, I spoke to Abdul from Algoracle, and he was trying to make a sports betting kind of app of sorts,
Yeah.
and he realized, I can't do this without the Oracle, so he had to pause that to build the Oracle. So it's really interesting. You're in a kind of similar situation there.
Yeah, I've spoken to Abdul about the same thing, and so completely agree. And I think we as a company started really looking at those elements. So, also things like launch pads, we were making sure dexes were coming, making sure money markets were coming, making sure DAO tooling is coming. And so our constant goal on the Meld Ventures side is to try to help to make sure that we're supporting the right projects that are needed. And if they're missing, we help find the teams and the right people to bring them together and bring them to market.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. In fact, you've already kind of answered a few of my questions I have here, but that's completely totally okay. So with Meld Gold, you can already hold your gold certificate in an Algorand wallet, correct?
Correct, exactly.
Now, are there any plans to create some sort of gold-backed derivative, maybe like a gold-backed stable coin? I heard the other day on the Recoup, I heard you speaking to Cooper about sort of a basket of stable coins to sort of give you the best bet, sort of, and then maybe even like trade routes that were taking the best route to get to the end execution. Could you touch a little bit more on all of that? I know I kind of jam-packed
Yeah,
three things in one question.
completely. Well, Algomint, and they are two different teams. So most of the interconnection between the teams often comes through me, which is not a bad thing. But also, the time is time
Could be a lot.
is hard sometimes. But essentially, Algomint, as a part of its bridging, we were looking at what does it need to be beyond just a bridge, and we don't underestimate the incredible task we have ahead of us of creating a fully decentralized bridge. It's a huge undertaking on its own. But beyond just being a bridge, we need to make sure that a bridge also has a long-term utility beyond just sitting with static value, as long as we can achieve that in a safe and secure way. So a part of that thinking included basketing. And so really what that looks like is one of the really big issues in blockchain is fragmentation of liquidity. So a great example, USD, and this applies to gold, but I find USD is probably the most relevant, especially for most people inside the Algorand ecosystem at the moment. If you've got Gemini, USDC on Tether, or USDC on Ethereum, Tether on Ethereum, BUSD, any of these other USD tokens, it's quite hard to get them into Algorand. Let's just say Algomint also bridged Gemini and we had Go Gemini. It's actually not that helpful because all of a sudden you also need an incredible amount of liquidity in those tokens, and you need LPs to really be driving there to be utility, regardless whether it's worth $1. It's only worth that if the DeFi ecosystem has enough depth that means it really can transact in that way. So for us, the idea of basketing made a huge amount of sense. If you've got like for like assets that you can group together and wrap into a single standard, you can create an incredible amount of liquidity in any asset that's acceptable in that matching without having to create new liquidity. So the intention for Go USD or Go Gold was you could bring any accepted standard of USDC or gold into those baskets and wrap them into a single standard on Algorand. And that would really allow for consolidated liquidity, which means there's going to be less slippage, which means there's going to be better trading capabilities in these kind of assets. And it also means, which I think is really an interesting one, and I'm going off track, JT. Everyone
Oh,
knows I probably do this a bit, but
that's totally okay.
but what we'll see, what I think we'll see is we'll see a lot more on ramps through USD coins, and we're seeing this already out of companies like Africa and PNG. And at the moment, when they create these on ramps, and the reason they create them out of these countries as their own token is because they don't have access to USDC rails or USDT rails. They really have no utility. So there's no point having an on ramp if there is no utility. Whereas if they can be accepted into something like an Algomint basket, then it really means they instantly can gain access to a whole range of liquidity. So for 100,000 users in Africa that are using this particular on ramp, they can all of a sudden on ramp with USD, bridge it in through Algom into the basket, and then gain complete liquidity and transaction freedom inside the ecosystem. And then likewise on exit, do the same. There's a little bit of magic that has to happen as well. So for example, in the baskets, there's obviously risk by being basketing because all of a sudden you only have to have one token fail and it impacts the basket. So there's a little bit of maneuvering, and the way we look at that is almost like a seesaw. So essentially, what you have is what we have like the preferred portions inside the basket. So the dream scenario is we have 5 tokens. Each token represents 20% of the basket is dream scenario. What we do for every time that comes out of kilter, the fees to enter the basket and swap inside the basket will vary. So if we've got too much of something, the fees become low. in order, if you actually want to access that token, you can do so really cheaply because we actually want to change the basket combination. Likewise, if you're bringing in a token there's too much of, the fees go up. So this way we can also really help control and help the market. And this is all automated to help the market actually move between the right tokens to keep a balanced basket. On top of that, which a lot of people don't know, I'm getting carried away again, JT, but which a lot of people don't know is at the moment with the bridge being more centralized, insurance is not such a big deal. You know, we have a really, really secure third-party custodian in Copperco. But as the bridge becomes decentralized, security and insurance around the assets becomes really important. And a part of this is also the loss in baskets. The goMint staking and the actual governance token is also the same token that will form a part of an insurance bond over assets inside the bridge. So by participating in governance and staking and generating rewards from the platform, you'll also be helping secure it in terms of insuring the underlying assets.
Perfect. Now that's a perfect segue into another question I had, which was, why did you choose to go the route of having a custodian for the assets with Copper, instead of maybe waiting to build out that smart contract infrastructure? Because I'd imagine that is what the end goal is, unless it's something of the sort. But if you could elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah, there's two parts to this answer. So part one is time. You know, I think we needed a bridge now, which I think was really important to do immediately. And I think this is still true. I think the second part is state proofs is really where we see the decentralization happening for Algomint. And though we have V1 of state proofs in February, it's actually not the version that allows us to be fully decentralized yet, as V1 is only one way. You know, we only go algo to EVM. We actually don't go the other way in state proofs V1. So the key goal was we didn't want to build out what is an incredibly complex structure, but also what is not an ideal structure. You know, if we replicated something like REN, they were really interesting and really incredibly technical and advanced style of decentralized bridging. State proofs offer such an improvement on that same scenario. So for us, it was, one, we can focus on launching now and focus on launching centralized now and give the ecosystem what it needs, which is a bridge today. Secondly, we can then also take our time, which is, I think, is also really important. Like it's a brilliant idea that we can have this trustless and decentralized bridge. The key issue, though, is we expect Algorand, I'm sure everyone listening expects Algorand to be, a $1 trillion ecosystem. The bridge will hold an incredible amount of value, which for us means there's an incredible responsibility for Algomint to ensure that bridge is secure, safe. We had the exploit recently in Tinyman. These are all great signs as to why we need to take our time. By having the centralized bridge to start with, we don't have to rush for delivering on a decentralized bridge on a really strict timeline. We actually have the freedom to really work our way through methodically, make sure the bridge is perfect, make sure the security is done, be able to have multiple audits before we really see that transition to being decentralized.
Yeah, I completely understand that decision. Is the decision to go that route part of the reason why at the moment you have to KYC in order to use the bridge?
It is. So there is a little bit of an interesting debate as to, whether KYC is going to be more onerous on crypto in the future. But like my biggest issue with KYC, beyond the fact that it's painful, is it is exclusionary. There is huge number of people who just can't complete a KYC. They haven't got the right documentation. They haven't got the right systems are integrated into the right places that even mean their documentation is valid. So I think that's a real issue, and it's certainly not the ideal scenario. So it's something we're definitely looking at and how that can adjust in the future. But as a part of being with any of the custodians, whenever they're stored in this manner, it does have to be KYC.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes complete sense. So if the assets bridged currently aren't locked in a smart contract, I mean, I guess this is more of the opinion piece, really. But if they're not locked in a smart contract, do the bridged assets add to the current TVL metric, at least tracked by places like DeFi Llama?
We have actually put in the paperwork to be tracked by DeFi Llama. It's an interesting one because the other thing to keep in mind is even if they're locked in smart contracts, they wouldn't be Algorand smart contracts because they'd be contracts on the native chain. So it's a funny debate kind of regardless. Also, BTC has no smart contract lock capability. So that would have to, it's, generally by some kind of dark node operated wallet structure. So it's probably gray whichever way you look at it. I think it will be accepted as TVL, which is great. But it is sort of it's one of those ones that's kind of in some middle ground that's almost opinion based on whether it should be included or not. But we're definitely pushing for it to be included.
I agree, and that's awesome to hear because I actually did ask if was going to ask if you had reached out to DeFi Llama because they actually commented on a thread of mine in Twitter asking how to calculate it, and I was like, hopefully you can get in contact with them because I'd imagine it's as simple as doing the math on how many bridged tokens there are, but uh,
Exactly, and we literally I think it's literally two teams, and so because we'd already been speaking to them for a couple of weeks, so I think it's literally just two different teams doing two different parts. So we after that message, we actually saw that message as well, JT, and we reached back out to make sure they had everything.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, for better or for worse, the market does seem to value a lot of these smart contract platforms based, at least in part, by their TVL. I mean, at the very least, the higher TVL gets more attention. So that could really be the reason that drives up the price in the long run. It might not really be the TVL. It could just be the attention that that high TVL brings with it. But regardless, we see all these other chains that get to a couple billion in TVL, maybe 10 billion plus, or even just 1 or 2 billion plus. And they start to take off and they start to get all the news coverage, all the influencer coverage. And I do believe that that is where Algorand will have its tipping point, is when we reach a point where the TVL is so great that it cannot be ignored anymore.
Completely. And look, I think as collectively for the ecosystem, the goal is sticky equity. I don't know if everyone's probably everyone who listens to me before has probably heard me say that 50 times, but I think it's once we can bring people in, I think we need to ensure that they can do everything they need to do. And this is where things like liquidity, depth of liquidity is important. If you can trade BTC, ETH, Algo, USD, a whole range of tokens in a matter of seconds at almost no cost, with little slippage, it'll become an incredibly enticing scenario to not just bridge in and not just enter the Algorand ecosystem, but to stay here.
Of course. And I just want to mention to anybody listening in the audience, if you do have any questions, just leave them in the chat. I am keeping an eye on them, and we will get to them towards the end of this episode. So just leave them there, and we definitely won't miss them. But so moving on. At first, there were limitations on how much a user could bridge at once. Are these limitations still in place? And if so, what criteria needs to be met before Algomint is satisfied with the security of the protocol to lift the restrictions?
So they were actually meant to lift last week. We didn't for with everything that played out with Tinyman and with the exploit. So we will actually lift it again soon. I think a part of what we probably want to see, which is what we had seen with the sort of trifecta we had of AlgoFi, Tinyman, and Algomint, was real utility for the assets as well. So at the moment, that's something we really want to ensure we see again. So whether it's Tinyman or Pact or any Humble or any of the other dexes that come to market in the near future, I think we'll be able to then have that same utilities to increase what's going to be able to be bridged, which is great. Also, on the back of that, we'll also be working on increasing the caps with AlgoFi as well. Similarly, with us increasing the bridge, AlgoFi, we're intending to increase the caps, and it was going to be a collaborative increase. And collectively, we decided just to hold off for the moment, get through what's currently taking place, and then we'll come back to that and readdress it. So it won't be far off, just not today.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like we're seeing the light at the end of that tunnel. I mean, that was that it feels like almost forever ago now, but it really just happened just the first of the year. So, uh, but the team's hard at work. They put out the second report now. It seems like everything's working itself out. So hopefully we all come back stronger after this, and we try to avoid these types of things. Of course, we always try to avoid these things. I don't want to say it like that, but hopefully we successfully do so in the future. But I mean, even the biggest companies get hacked, so we're never going to be perfectly invulnerable to it. So it's obviously always something to consider the risks for sure. But regardless, yeah, I think the team's doing great, and that makes complete sense that you're holding off a little bit. But it's good to hear that that's right around the corner. So Algomint launched a Million Algo community incentive program, and to be eligible for the rewards, you must bridge the BTC or ETH and then not unlock your goBTC or ETH until the end of February. Why was it designed in this manner, and how is the program going so far?
Look, really good. I think the last 2 weeks has made it slightly harder, not being able to increase, the flow for the bridge. The intention was really to create. We didn't want it to be you had to hold your Go BTC or Go ETH because again, the idea here is sticky equity. So if we actually have BTC and ETH come in and then they have to sit on it for 3 months, we aren't actually creating the experience where users who, especially new users to Algorand, actually get to come in and actually start doing things in the ecosystem. So I think in reality, the intention of the incentive program was to bring people into the ecosystem and then say you can't leave with that asset, but you can actually go and get a loan on AlgoFi. You can go and trade it on Tinyman. You can go and get a loan and then LP. You can do this really nice combination of actually experiencing some of Algorand's ecosystem. So the intention of, and this is really in collaboration both with AlgoFi, Tinyman, and the Algorand Foundation, was right. Let's create the funnel where you can get some rewards for actually just entering and joining the Algorand ecosystem, but we don't limit you in terms of you have to sit there with it. You actually just enter, you become a part of it. As long as you don't leave, you can go off and do whatever you want on the ecosystem. You can even sell the asset. You just can't actually leave with that asset. So the intention was really just to create an incentive to enter and then run free, and ideally take advantage of the AlgoFi and Tinyman reward programs. The date was chosen more to do with what our expectation was for TVL of what we thought we could achieve. So whether we get to the whole million or whether we get to 500,000, we're expecting to get somewhere in that range.
Awesome. So, I mean, I was going to wait until the end, but this person actually just had the same question I was about to ask. So Jamie asked, does the incentive program end on a specific date? Because when I read it, did just say end of February. Is that the very last day of February?
Correct. Yeah. So
Awesome.
it'll be
Cool.
very last day of February. I think we'll do similar to the foundation, which is almost the most extreme time zone. So no one thinks it's still 10 p.m. and it's actually 1 a.m. by our standards. So yeah, very last day of February at the last cutoff time. So I think we'll actually the team will announce the official time to use as the parameters as well shortly.
Awesome. Yeah, because we're all on different times here. What time is it there actually?
It's 9:30 a.m. So not too
Oh,
bad.
oh 9:30 a.m. Awesome. It's 6 p.m. where I am, so we're 6:30, I guess. But wow.
Australia is a pretty extreme time zone.
Well, good morning, by the way.
Yeah.
So, is there a timeline for when the Algomint governance token will be released? I've heard rumors of Q1, but I also know that you prefer to wait until there is an Algorand native token launchpad. Are we close to seeing these things unfold?
So look, it will be Q1. We are set on being Q1. In terms of a launch pad, there's two launch pads that we're quite close with. Actually, three that we're quite close with that are working on coming to market. I don't know that they will actually be in time for that. So I think the token will probably be available before that happens, likely via one of the dexes. So sadly, like we are really keen to wait for a launch pad, but a multitude of circumstances means that it isn't going to be here in time.
Yeah,
But the key thing is we do have some great launch pads being built, so there are going to be brilliant options. They just probably won't be options Algomint can
for
use,
you.
sadly.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that makes sense. I mean, you can only hold out for so long. That is a little sad to hear that we couldn't time it out perfectly, but some things are just out of your control for sure. Um,
And so JT, like we've continued to hold off with exactly that in mind, and I think it just got to the point where it was like, all right, if we keep pushing, because then the dates keep moving, it's going to be 2025, and we're going to be talking about excitements around launching.
oh man,
uh,
I couldn't imagine it'd be that long, but I do understand your point for
I
sure.
agree, yeah.
Um, so I guess this is another opinion piece here. Since Algorand is powering El Salvador's Chivo wallet, and their government announced it would be adopting Algorand to build out at least some of its government infrastructure, could you foresee a day when the El Salvador government or any other government looking to adopt Bitcoin is utilizing goBTC rather than the traditional asset?
Yeah, so I think we've actually like a lot of the talk is around what the kinds of wrapped assets that are going to be used by countries like El Salvador. So with like a wrapped BTC in El Salvador on Algorand, they're looking at more of a BTC that has clawbacks and freezes. I think a lot of that is to do with the idea that they are probably anxious about completely uninitiated community all of a sudden having sovereignty over their own finances, which seems like a really great idea. And I think we all love the concept of that's where the world is heading. I think when you're talking about an entire country that's unprepared for that responsibility, or probably doesn't realize what that actually means, where if you lose, the keys to your wallet, the money is gone. So at the moment, I think the structure they're looking at is this hybrid, where though you've got everything being transacted on blockchain, or this huge portion transacted on blockchain, you could still turn up to, the bank, if you will, and actually have them like reset your account or pull your assets into another wallet to reclaim the value. I think the intention, though, is this is a really great stepping stone for people then to take that next step into genuine sovereignty of their assets and their financial responsibility. So I think we will see them transition, and we didn't want to have clawbacks and freezes because I think it didn't make a lot of sense for Algomint to wield that power over these kind of assets, especially when the intention is to be a trustless bridge in future. A part of that means we shouldn't have the power to impact those assets outside of the trustless wrapping and unwrapping. So I definitely think it will happen eventually, but I think it's going to be a little bit of a process of people becoming used to having that kind of responsibility before they really take the leap.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I didn't really consider that perspective before. I mean, when you boil it down, it's essentially just, going into the shallow end of the pool when you don't know how to swim, as opposed to just jumping into the deep end. So, I do understand. I know some people have negative feelings towards clawback features and freeze features, especially if held by a government. Um, but I do think there are some legitimate use cases for it, and you did just outline some there. So I'm still sort of indifferent to the concept. I do believe that some projects don't need the need for it, like as you said, like you didn't agree that you needed the need for it, but I could see the use case for different businesses or governments. So um, yeah, that makes
I think
complete
I think
sense.
we may see JT people experiment with this in the future, where they actually try to put the controls in a trustless manner to freeze and clawbacks, and we might see different types of usage of those kind of powers. But I think for the moment, I think for the most part, we probably won't see them used as much unless there is really legitimate use case. Like another really great example is KYC tokens. I think if we end up seeing KYC identity in either encrypted packages or tokens on chain, clawbacks are a necessity for anyone who's no longer valid to have that KYC token. But yeah, no, completely agree.
Yep, of course. So on the recoup with Cooper, I noticed that you had quite the discussion on oracles and state proofs. I know you touched on state proofs a little bit before, and we did mention Algoracle. But now that the news is out about Algoracle, are there any interesting ways that you see Algomint using Oracle services or state proof functionality?
So the key piece for state proofs will be we will utilize it for the decentralized bridge. So that will be the intention. The one thing to keep in mind is Algorand is committed to building EVM state proofs. So, AVM to EVM. At this stage, not for other chains. We've been talking about whether or not Algorand potentially looks at taking the responsibility of looking at implementing state proofs for other chains as well. But initially, the focus will be on working with the Algorand developed tech for really obvious reasons to implement that trustless version of the Algomint bridge. Keeping in mind, like I said before, the version 1 of that bridge doesn't go both ways. Version 1 of that bridge actually just goes AVM to EVM, not EVM to AVM. So you can't have a fully decentralized bridge in the current version of state proofs that's being released, but the other piece of that puzzle will come later in the year. It also won't solve for some things like Bitcoin, HNT, some of the other assets we're bridging, but we'll definitely be utilizing them in the long term in as many places as possible as the core infrastructure of the decentralization part for Algomint. So people are aware, which, and I know I've explained this a little bit before, but essentially it allows the information to flow between the two chains. We still need to build the contracts on either side of that actually control what happens with that information. So that's the key piece Algomint will do and in reality, interestingly enough, this gateway of information will replace the Oracle piece in terms of what the bridge would need to use. So it's unlikely we will need to use an Oracle, though not impossible. It's unlikely. What's interesting though, where state proofs actually play into the Oracle space, there's another Oracle building on Algorand that's been doing a fair bit of work around this. That's really interesting as well. But, we might start to see things like DAO voting on Algorand for EVM chains. And the reason why state proofs plays into this is, if you can imagine, you could do a full DAO vote. You can actually do everything on chain, all the voting, all the resulting, and then you could broadcast the results through state proofs in a single transaction to EVM. And these kind of interesting elements, including even passing Oracle data for pricing, where you could aggregate fully on chain, do complex, multi-call aggregation on chain, bundle that up into a single piece of information and pass that via state proofs to Ethereum. I think those kind of use cases, we're probably going to start to see some of those things unfold with the use of state proofs. And I know some of the oracles, like the one I was mentioning, they've been looking at exactly that.
Yeah, state proofs are such an interesting concept. I mean, it's a fantastic concept, but it's such a hard concept to grasp. I know after Decipher, I reached out to Ninos at Arlington Capital because he spoke about it. He seemed to know a lot about it, and he gave me a nice condensed version of it. And we're speaking about it a lot here. I've heard about it a lot, and even still, it's still like I still don't quite 100% grasp how it works. But it seems like I'm not alone, even by the people that are working on it. Almost, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, look, I think for a lot of this sort of stuff, it's also like with any of these kind of innovative technologies. When you are really the first to do something, the path isn't crystal clear. It's kind of like lightly foggy, as I like to describe it. So I think for a lot of it too, they have a really clear thesis on how it works. I think the actual maneuvering of actually getting it to function is the key piece there, and that's really an ongoing and moving target as they really work their way through. I'm sure we'll find there will be 50 things we have to tweak as we go. We're going to learn so much from this first version, because in reality, it's a huge innovative leap. It is Algorand's really pioneering this tech. So to be the first to do anything is going to be a ride, but we're excited for it.
Of course. So moving on to Algorand more broadly, and this is more of a subjective question as well. What are the most exciting developments happening in the Algorand ecosystem, in your opinion? It's kind of a loaded question. It's probably hard to distill into something short.
Yeah, look, I think
Although it
I
doesn't
think
have to be short, just to say.
Look, I think probably this is probably not necessarily the answer you expected, but I think that the way that so many of the projects are collaborative, I think is actually brilliant. I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with the alternative ecosystems, but they often aren't so collaborative. They can be quite combative. There's a lot of competition. There's a lot of fighting for TVL and for market share. Look, a part of this is probably because the ecosystem is new and there's not a huge amount of competition in particular protocols yet. But what it has meant is we've seen a lot of collaboration and a lot of joint efforts in trying to just grow the ecosystem. And I don't think there's almost any founders that haven't been excited to help grow Algorand. Everyone, and I think there's a lot of this is to do with being early. If you were early, you were before anything that was insanely exciting, you were a true believer. And I think when you're a true believer, you want to see ecosystems like Algorand truly succeed. And I think it creates a different type of energy in the space. So I think we've definitely seen a huge push for collaboration between all kinds of projects in the ecosystem. I think the other thing I'm really excited for is that all the projects inside the ecosystem have had the chance to look at what's been done elsewhere. We've had the benefit of hindsight. We've been able to look at what's been done in Ethereum, even what's been done in Solana, what's been done in all these different spaces, and be able to take learnings from them all, pull apart to the pieces we think are really perfect, and assemble products based on what we think is best, with adding in our own interesting ideas, and then layering that on top of Algorand tech. Has created some really brilliant innovations in products we're seeing come to market. So I think we're going to be quite lucky that the caliber of products that are coming is really high, and their roadmaps and plans for iterations are going to create really powerful protocols across the ecosystem. So I think that's probably what I'm most excited for. I'm actually also super excited for February's upgrade, because this backlog of projects that we've all been waiting for, that all of a sudden will have, contract to contract calls and have all the expanded on-chain data. all of these things will mean we'll have this really great flood of great projects coming into the space. And there's a lot of them. Like there's a lot of great projects that are lining up to launch, and it's massive NFT projects, brilliant DeFi projects, like a really great string of quality projects coming.
Was that February upgrade announced in the Twitter space they recently held?
They actually gave some more information on it. I think they actually hinted that it might be slightly more delayed than I think
Okay.
those in the know are expecting. It's meant to be the first couple of weeks of February. It might be closer to the end of February, maybe first week of March. But they definitely, it might have also been, I'm not sure if that was the first sort of public information. I always lose track of what's public and what I'm not meant to tell people.
Oh, geez. Yeah, because I didn't make that Twitter space, and I was a little disappointed, but had to work, so only so much you could do. But it's
Exactly.
actually really great to hear because I had no idea the upgrade was just around the corner. I knew they were hoping for Q1, but I didn't have a specific month or date in mind. So I mean, that's really great to hear.
Yeah, well, JT, it's also probably good to know. So we speak to the guys at Arrington about this all the time, and they've actually been brilliant. The guys at Borderless, the guys at Arrington, they've all been brilliant at really leading the charge on educating the greater blockchain ecosystem about Algorand. We do a lot of this as well. We talk to a lot of VCs, a lot of other protocols, a lot of the interesting parties outside of Algorand that could actually bring a lot of value into Algorand. And for most of them, when they realize that composability is extraordinarily limited today, and that's why we're seeing not a huge amount of projects on Algorand. It's not because no one wants to build here, it's because the technology is limited at the moment, and to really allow the full DeFi capabilities. And when I say DeFi, I'm not necessarily talking about just finance, but it's all those capabilities of that powerful decentralization of smart contract controlled ecosystems, because that isn't really viable until this upgrade. That's the reason why we haven't seen 10 incredible projects in the ecosystem doing amazing technically advanced things. And once most people understand that, it's really a moment of, okay, all right, so the tech is actually holding back this flow. And when we sort of say holding back, I think Silvio says this, even said this at the Cypher, or not in these exact words, but Algorand is really focused on creating a long-term, sustainable, high-quality blockchain, and that is not something that can be done fast. It does require an incredible amount of work, and they are revolutionizing, the way the trilemma has been solved. They are the first of their kind to do what they've done, and doing that well in a way that could allow for global adoption is something that also can't be rushed. And that resonates really, really well. And a lot of people, it's that really great, okay, I get it now moment.
Yeah, see, I think I totally agree that they are taking their time, and I do appreciate that because, as you said, they're working to build the future of finance like that. I don't think that's just a slogan for them. I do believe that that is their goal, but it must be tough working inside a market that is anything but patient. They see
Yeah.
smart contract platforms like Solana that just kind of take off, and then they're looking at Algorand that's just, and it's like, why is it not doing anything? It has a great team. There's been hundreds of millions of dollars worth of funding through various funds that have been announced. And it just seems like the broader market and its influencers almost seem to intentionally ignore Algorand. So it'll be very interesting to see if after this upgrade in February, if all that changes as we get this flood of applications that are being built on top of it.
Look, and I think we will, because I think, funnily enough, someone said it to me quite well the other day. The Tinyman exploit actually, the news of that rippled also made a lot of people realize that there was DeFi starting to happen on Algorand, which is a really funny sort of, something to come out of the
They,
exploit.
they say sometimes bad news is better than no news at all, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it was quite fascinating that was kind of a result of the exploit. But I think even a lot of the projects that are building, I know Natalie from Prismatic, which anyone who's met Natalie, she's brilliant. I think, like the lead time always seems so long. She's building a complex product and there's a lot of work there, and it can be quite stressful because it feels like dog years, I think, in blockchain. So when you say 3 months or 6 months, in your head it's years equivalent. So, but it's, I think it's 2022 is the year where there's so many great projects that are lined up to launch. We're just going to see this sort of string between March all the way through December of just quality projects coming to market constantly, which is awesome.
Awesome. So let's move on to the metaverse. I know it's a hot topic. A lot of people love talking about the metaverse. We already have projects like Zone being launched, and the new news that just came out with the Drone Racing League, that leveraging Algorand in different innovative ways. How do you see the Algorand metaverse space unfolding, and what are the most exciting aspects of it to you currently?
Yeah. And look, there's all different kinds of ways to define a metaverse, and I think I think often, especially in blockchain, your first thought is a world. There is an incredible world building on Algorand, which is really exciting. They have their own really interesting mantra, which I've been fortunate enough to contribute to on how that should look, which I'm super excited for. But the overall idea of a metaverse is not necessarily world based. I think what we'll really see is portability. I think I call it portability versus interoperability because I think portability also relates to not necessarily moving between chains. I feel like portability is a great way to describe moving between protocols, is probably a better way to put it. I don't know, Chris from Reach talks about this quite a bit with Game Jam Protocol, which I think is changing its name shortly. But he talked about the idea of moving from one game to another with different NFTs and being able to do different things. And that's that kind of portability that we're talking about. And I think for things like Drone Racing League and Zone, I think there'll probably be very similar portability applications, and that will be kind of the definition of the metaverse. It's being able to seamlessly move between these games without having to get a new set of NFTs or a new set of characters or avatars. You can actually move interoperably. I think for what we're seeing on the world side with the project that's being built at the moment is, their real focus is creating this seamless one-stop sort of integration inside the ecosystem. So almost the glue that joins it all together, with the intention you could enter the metaverse and go into a game or do a transaction or do a trade or do a bridge or yield farm or buy an NFT without necessarily having to move from protocol to protocol, connect your wallet, disconnect your wallet. You sort of can create this seamless way to transact and create efficiencies around how that is structured. And I think once we see people have the freedom to come in and build something really interesting and innovative, it'll kind of be like this extreme version of a yield vault, where you can almost structure these interesting ways to transact, where you can create this fully seamless experience for users. I think why this is also really important is initially, I think a world like this will actually start where it'll be the Algorand ecosystem that'll be the key adopter, as well as maybe some of the IP that's coming in there will bring new people in as well. But I think long term, this will be a big key in helping the uninitiated enter and really easily navigate something like the Algorand ecosystem. Because I think if you've got a new user now who came in, or let's say they came in June and we've got 30 great protocols in the ecosystem, navigating that is, a nightmare in itself, let alone navigating it and feeling confident enough to do things as you navigate, without feeling like, did I just do something horribly wrong? Am I at risk? Is there a dangerous transaction I've done here? Do I need to watch my liquidation point? All of these things are quite painful for new users. And I think simplifying that through something like the metaverse will be really important.
Yeah, of course. I feel like when a lot of us picture the metaverse, we think of this reality in which we're wearing, our Oculus headsets and we're traversing this virtual world, and maybe our avatars, or maybe we look like ourselves, and we have these spaces where our NFTs are displayed on the walls, and maybe we're using another NFT to go attend a concert somewhere over in this part of the metaverse. I know Snoop Dogg recently jumped into the Sandbox metaverse. And we have Decentraland and things of that sort. Now, neither of those really interested me too much because I'm not a big gamer. So, like for me, it really has to it has to really look appealing for me to want to join. It's very blocky and stuff now. I'd imagine that's going to change as time goes on. But I could truly envision a day where that sort of virtual world exists on top of at least some sort of blockchain, whether it's Algorand or maybe even a new technology that comes up in the future. Um, do you have any thoughts on these specific types of virtual worlds, and do you agree that this is likely where we're heading, and does it sort of remind you of maybe like a Ready Player One concept in that way?
Look, it does. I think Ready Player One had a really strong, well, I should say Ready Player One, the book and the movie, had a really strong lean towards gaming.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'm sort of similar to you, JT, that I don't think it's where it's going to be a huge part. You know, we all know the gaming world is massive and only getting bigger. But I think the applications are tremendous. You know, I think a really, really great example, and I talk a lot about it with the metaverse guys about this, but even education, you know, the ability to actually school 10,000 kids via one teacher is quite fascinating. And the reason I say it's such a great application inside the metaverse, you know, you can imagine that the brilliant part about the metaverse is what's overlaid is at the discretion of the developer. So, you know, you might be a kid in a virtual classroom that's looking at a real teacher that's being streamed into the classroom, and there's only 9 students around you. Those students have been dynamically selected to be complementary to your learning experience. What you don't know is you're one of 1,000 of the same 10 kids that are actually looking at the exact same teacher doing the exact same presentation. You know, those kind of capabilities where education can be brought and to those that don't have access to quality education in a way that could actually be really impactful and valuable, and probably in many ways, you know, analyzed in a way that could also create a better learning experience than even potentially in a real classroom, because you're no longer being paired with kids that are just local to your physical location. You're actually being paired with kids that will help enhance your learning experience, and interactions with those kids will actually help you on your journey to educate yourself. I say that like, you know, I'm talking about 6 year olds and things, but you can appreciate what I mean. So I think that the key there is how do we bring that technology, you know, and guys like, you might have heard me talk about this before, JT, but guys like Polynize are doing interesting stuff around this, like how you actually analyze different personality types or problem solving types to give them almost a score or rating around what, you know, what am I suited to, what is the right kind of, you know, area I should be working in, or where do I really have skill sets, where can I add value. I think we'll see a lot more of that kind of interesting tech come to play, where we're helping to help people make better decisions. I know I went to a careers day in high school, and they didn't tell me much of anything, which
Yep.
wasn't very helpful, and certainly wasn't analytical. It was kind of more of a "what do you think you should do," you know, sort of scenario. And I think there's an endless amount of improvements we can do on those kinds of things, and that really plays out into a whole range of things. Like it can also include things like mental health. You know, there's a whole big deep dive into mental health and how we can actually address that in the metaverse in a way that's far more impactful than what is currently available, or maybe better said, far more impactful on scale than what's currently available.
Yeah, I agree, and those are great points. I mean, the various ways that it could revolutionize, public health and education, and maybe even how we organize. Whether it be, some sort of DAO that gets together in some metaverse setting for, labor rights or something to organize, for some labor movement, or some other significant issue, whether it's for some climate change policy, or whatever it could be. I don't want to make this a political argument. It could be used for anything in reality, but I think that's a really revolutionary concept to really grapple with, for sure. Uh, Sorry, go ahead, real quick.
And I was going to say it's a big task, so I think
Yeah.
it's going to take time. And but the brilliant part is, I think especially those early in the ecosystems like Algorand, they're incredibly keen and willing to participate and help, and be a part of the community that supports these kind of ideas. So, you know, I think there's going to be some brilliant work to be done ahead. And Algorand is the perfect place for it. You know, like, because one of the other really big parts, I'm going to ramble again, JT, but one of the other really big parts is, even if you wanted to go and do something on Ethereum, even if you built this in Ethereum, you know, it's exclusionary again, because the transaction fees mean it alienates, you know, such a huge portion of the world. And when we talk about undereducated, or those that are lacking the ability to access genuine education or mental health assistance, you know, generally that portion of society is also really big in terms of missing out on that component. So to exclude them is really actually quite damaging, and kind of counterproductive to what needs to be achieved with this kind of tech.
Yeah, I mean, you said it perfectly. So to move off from the metaverse a little bit, let's before I run out of time with you, let's talk a little bit about what happened with Tinyman. So Algomint was the second largest LP in the primary pools affected. Is that correct? Um,
Correct.
and this exploit happened on New Year's. How did this exploit affect Algomint now that the dust has settled? Obviously, it affected you when it was happening because you were losing funds. But now that the dust has settled, how has it affected Algomint, and how are you proceeding?
And sorry, JT, it was Meld Ventures was the LP themselves
Okay.
versus Algomint. But in terms of the effect, I think the big piece is it's probably slowed down expansion of what you can bridge. So we haven't increased the limits. Similar with AlgoFi, they haven't increased the limits. We've essentially, the best way to probably put it is we're taking a breath just to assess. We also spend a great deal of time going back through our security systems, our security protocols. We've also done things like started coordinating with a lot of projects on what is an emergency plan.
Yeah.
One of the things that actually came out of that warning was having a really good list of contacts to be able to actually get in touch with the right people, to make sure the right things are happening, to offer assistance, and to make sure that, hey, if something is needed, we can
Turn this
actually.
back on.
Oh no, you're right,
No, you
Jason.
you can keep going. You can keep going. I'll turn this back on.
Was also to make sure if we could help, what was needed, can we do something to assist? So I think it was, in reality, it was a really early lesson for in so many ways. Thankfully, Algomint fundamentally wasn't affected. It was more just the repercussions of everything happening that we had to deal with. I think also because goBTC and goETH were particularly impacted on the Tinyman pools, there was a lot of sort of chat like there was potentially an issue with Algomint, which there definitely wasn't, which we kind of struggled with how to handle at the time. But I think once the exploit was made public by the team, it was really clear what why that was, and we were aware of why it was just before the announcement was made. But in general, I think it's only going to mean we're going to come out the other side stronger. We're going to have a lot of scar tissue as an ecosystem that has in reality been gained at a very cheap price. But look, I think to Tinyman, they're working really hard to come back online. They've got their second audit happening. They've really stepped up to make sure they address these issues. It was also, it was great that Runtime came out and accepted responsibility that they had missed it in the audit. At the same time, it was probably also a great learning for them. I think they've got scar tissue on the backside of this. Tinyman's also built directly in Teal. We are now seeing projects built in PyTeal and Reach. So, I think it'll hopefully mean Runtime are really prepared. And I know they're doing additional audits on their audits, which is great. So I think everyone across the ecosystem, whether it be auditors or projects themselves, have really gained a lot from the experience, and they come out the other side a lot stronger.
I appreciate you holding down the fort while I fixed that. I guess my battery died and it wasn't plugged in, but yeah, I do appreciate that. Do you know if any of the money has been returned? I read somewhere that it had, but I don't think I read it from an authoritative source. So I just wanted to.
Look, it was meant to be. I haven't actually tracked if it actually genuinely has been returned, but one particular exploiter. So as people might be aware, we had the main exploiter.
Yep.
We then
And
had
then
a
it
string
trickled
of
in.
additional. Exactly. You debatably you could say it might have been the same person doing it from different accounts, but
Yep.
I would say unlikely. And with I believe one or two have volunteered to return some funds, which is great. But I haven't actually tracked if they have returned those funds. And I know Tinyman has sort of committed to making good on the losses. I think that's a task for them in themselves because the big thing to keep in mind too is we saw the actual withdrawal from the pools, but post withdrawal we saw the effects of what that did to the pricing. And so there was almost two sets of loss. There was the actual exploit and the withdrawal from the protocol, and then there was the aftermath of arbitrage that meant another chunk went missing through what was perfectly legitimate trading. It's a DEX, the price is the price. So I think they've got a little bit to deal with to really wade through what the actual, as you sort of said, as the dust settles, what that actually means.
Of course, and that just about wraps up all the questions I had. So before we run out of time, there weren't too many questions, but I might as well get to a couple of these questions that are piling up over here. So we have Nico Rome asking, are there any plans to support all kinds of Algorand nodes, relay participation, algorical, and API indexers for a more robust network?
So look, we in terms of Algomint, we'll definitely be offering a full set of SDKs and allow people to access and utilize. Like I think I probably can't talk as much to the plans around the nodes for the ecosystem in general. But in terms of what Algomint intends to do, like our ultimate goal is, and people have heard me talk about this before, I expect blockchain tech will be invisible in the future. It'll be no different to using email.
Yep.
We don't understand how it works. It's brilliant tech and it's useful, and I use it 10 million times a day. Blockchain tech will be much the same. It'll invisibly replace so much of what we do. Algomint will be no different. I think long term, what we'll see is will be back end integration or back end tech for platforms to use. You could bring your ETH straight to Tinyman, and it instantly gets bridged into goETH, so you can transact. And when you leave, you can actually exit in ETH. All these kinds of capabilities to move between, where you're not actually having to go to a bridge, set up an account, bridge, go to where you want to end up. You can actually make that whole process really seamless. So our end goal is really to keep building on the tech so we can offer that kind of integration and that kind of capability to other projects. But sadly, I can't comment on what's going to happen around the nodes in the space.
Of course. So we have Louise here asking, "Go Sol," or I don't know what the POL ticker is, but basically the question is, when would there be additional assets on the bridge, and are you considering bridging to Solana? I know Glitter Finance is working on a bridge to and from Algorand, Solana, and a couple other blockchains, but I think that's their most hyped portion of their bridges, or probably the most used one, or will be the most used one. But are there any plans to add additional assets and bridge to additional blockchains, or even maybe include ERC20 tokens, because you already can bridge Ethereum, so maybe other tokens on the same blockchain?
Yeah, completely. So we've got a fairly big list of tokens that will be bridged. To sort of, I think it's probably easiest if I talk about the strategy around where that thinking is coming from. So at the moment, most of our thoughts around what gets bridged next is based on one, what value we can bring to the ecosystem, which really boils down to working with the different partners in the ecosystem on what they can use, what is actually going to be really useful, again, what's going to have utility. So a really great example has been working with the Helium team and the guys at StakeJoy with HNT to bring HNT to Algorand. And a really great example as to why this is a really brilliant asset to bring in is there's no smart contract capability on HNT. The wallet, they haven't been focused energy on developing the wallet because they've got so much energy on developing the actual physical ecosystem. So because of that, there's a huge capability to one, start borrowing and DeFi against HNT, LPing it, being able to trade it with velocity on the DEXs, be able to do a whole range of additional functionality that just isn't possible inside HNT. Plus, we've got a really strong group of committed investors, both from the Helium space and the Algorand space, who are going to bridge and build that market. On top of that, a whole range of ERCs, including bridging for Borderless and a lot of the other VCs that want to bridge their treasuries and other assets across to Algorand. Which is brilliant. So I think our key focus at the moment is to bridge a whole range of assets, and while we do that, including ERC20s, it will include things like Solana assets and other blockchains as well.
And that leads us to Whiskey61 here's question: when go gold? So are there plans to also have wrapped version of gold, or any of the other precious metals that could be tradable on a DEX like Tinyman or any of the other DEXs you had mentioned?
Yeah, so Meld Gold will have gold and silver at a base form, which will be its particular gold and silver. Algomint will wrap gold as well. It won't wrap silver at this stage, or basket silver, I should say, because there is just not enough types of silver to really offer a basketing option. But there's enough quality versions of gold tokens to do a basketed gold. So we'll definitely have that coming to market at some point in the near future as well. One of the really good things to understand about the baskets as well is you can swap between assets inside the basket. So you could, for example, bring Paxos Gold to the bridge and actually swap into Meld Gold inside the basket versus necessarily wrap as well, which I think will be really important as well, especially if Meld Gold continues to build out its physical redemption ecosystem. If you're in Paxos, which is actually really hard to redeem, you could swap to Meld Gold and go redeem in Australia, for example, really simply and easily. And I think likewise with USD, if you have USDC on Ethereum and you want to get to Gemini because you have an off ramp in Singapore, you can do that through the baskets at what is almost like a stable swap scenario. So really low fees at a 1-to-1 ratio.
Yeah, I really feel like these baskets could be a revolutionary kind of feature in the blockchain space, or at least for Algorand. Every time you mention it, it sounds so uh, almost common sense. Like why didn't this exist? The way you're describing it to me, it's just like almost a no brainer. Uh, Sorry,
We think so too, JT. So I'm glad you agree.
of course. So this seems like well, only have you for about another minute, so this seems like going to be our last question. Hodleboy6 asks, how, it's more of a general question, how do you feel about Web 3.0? Yeah, I'll just end it there because the rest, yeah. How do you feel about Web 3.0? I know it's a very general question because, and much like the metaverse, it kind of has a very vague definition, but I'll let you take it from
Yeah,
there.
yeah. Look, I think Web 3.0. I love Web 3.0. I think to be clear though on probably where I see it going. And thanks Hoddle for the question as well. Where I see, and everyone else for the questions too, I should say. Where I see Web 3 going is it needs to be delivering on what decentralization has promised. When I say that, even though we are building a decentralized infrastructure with blockchain, so much is still centralized, or so much is really, I'd even say a majority is actually not decentralized. Even everything from the way NFTs are hosted and the way the data is hosted, like so much of this is actually not decentralized yet. Web3 has this huge task of trying to deliver on that promise. And I think it's not going to be a small undertaking, and it's going to be incremental. We're going to see little leaps and bounds through this process of all of a sudden one new feature will start to remove one piece from being centralized to decentralized. And I think that will be a really slow incremental process, but it's a necessity because it's what really is required to build the ecosystem I think the world needs. So I'm super excited for it, but I also think we it won't be perfect. We're still going to have things that will be better, but not perfect. And I think in a space where we're all impatient, we're probably just going to have to bear with Web3 as it slowly moves its way towards the version we all hope to see one day.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we certainly are very impatient, and you touched on something kind of important in your explanation there, which is just to zoom into the NFT part that you mentioned. It's also one of my main concerns with NFTs right now is the fact that they are or can be so centralized that where the data is hosted could be changed after you purchase the NFT. There's actually even been cases of this happening on other blockchains where you think you're buying a specific picture and then it changes to a literal picture of a rug. So it's like that is one of my biggest concerns, at least with the NFT space currently. But as I do understand, there are like on-chain storage things that are coming, and other storage technologies that will likely solve that issue. Because as of right now, I mean, you could store the image on like a Google Drive or something like that, and anyone that has access to that Google Drive can change it, even though the NFT or the token is immutable.
Exactly right. And this is sort of where I was pointing to before. Was this is exactly what I mean by we still have so much of it centralized. Even in the IPFS, there's elements of centralization that means it's not as secure as it would be in a fully decentralized version. So there's a huge amount of work there. We are seeing projects like Originals Only, which goes live imminently. They're making an announcement at the end of this month. I'd like to say more, but I'm sure someone will send me a not a very nice email. But they're building out some really interesting tech around solving this. And one great example of how the solutions that they've been working on, which I don't think it's going live in V1, but it'll go live in later versions, is you can actually hash code down an image, for example. It almost forms its DNA, so it could become verifiable, and that hash could be stored inside the blockchain or the NFT itself, and is small enough to be stored there. So though you can't necessarily see the image directly inside, you almost have this strand of DNA that can be verifiable against the image that's related to it. So there are solutions, and this is the kind of thinking Web3 is doing, where I say it's not perfect because they're not storing the image inside the NFT, but they're starting to look at ways on how we can actually, okay, we can't store it, but we could make it verifiable that the image you are seeing is the right image that's associated with this NFT. Which I think is really important. The other really big one there to take account of, and I do actually need to go, JT, I'm sorry, but
Oh, I
the
get
other
it. I get it.
thing you got to take account of as well, is even when those images are hosted, it's not forever. The places they're hosted aren't dedicated to storing them for the next 1,000 years. Often there's almost a timeline that's being paid for, or they're supported by a business that, if no longer operates, is
Yep.
no longer going to pay the bill. So the other sort of stuff originals only are looking at is, how do you create renewable hosting where NFT owners can actually renew for 50 years at a time or 10 years at a time? Because the hosting is actually not necessarily expensive. It just actually needs to have a
Has
system
to
and process.
has to be done. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Of course. Well, Michael, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate you answering everyone's questions and my questions. It was a pleasure speaking to you, and I hope you have a good rest of your morning.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it. Thanks very much for having me. See you, everyone.
Of
Thanks for the questions.
of course. Take care. All right, everybody. I appreciate you watching to the end. Those of you that have stuck with us all the way until the end, I hope you appreciated the interview we just had. If you did, just smash that thumbs up button and consider subscribing to the channel if you aren't subscribed already. But we've been here for quite a bit, so I'm going to log off. I appreciate every one of you. Have a good night, day, or morning wherever you are in the world. Take care.